Monsters that we invent or discover in fantasy are not always so different from us. Sometimes these creatures are only partly different, or a piece of them is what redefines them, while who they are and what they believe still remains very recognizable. Such is it with the noble race known as Centaurs. But Centaurs never existed in history, so would our ancestors have treated them differently for this simple difference? Would they have lived apart from our ancestors or worked alongside them? How would they fare in combat, especially as we move into the modern age? Let's discuss that. This is Fantastical History. Most, if not all of us here, are familiar with the basics of a centaur. A centaur is a creature with the upper torso of a human, but their lower body has been replaced with the four limbs and flank of a horse. In most interpretations of these beings, they are portrayed as strong, proud, and mysterious. In Harry Potter, the centaurs are portrayed as mystics who look to the stars to understand the future and ways of the world. In Narnia, they are one of the many races of the realm who bear an uncanny sense of honor and devotion, almost always serving alongside the protagonist in side of good. There are two attributes that we can perhaps attribute to all centaurs, considering how often we see these traits applied to them. Centaurs are proud with a high sense of honor, and centaurs are incredibly strong and resilient. Both of these traits make perfect sense considering their horse half. Horses themselves are sometimes believed to be an inherently emotional and proud species, while also being incredibly strong and essential for life. My brother even asked an interesting question. Would centaurs consider horses in the same way humans consider monkeys? A species that's just beneath them but close to them. It's an interesting question, but it raises another. One that will define how we discuss centaurs in history. How would centaurs and humans look at each other? Would it be in a similar manner? They would see each other as something beneath them. In Harry Potter, Dolores Umbridge explains that centaurs are classified by the Ministry of Magic as creatures of subhuman or near-human intelligence, clearly defining how the wizarding world sees them. The centaurs in kind see humans as reckless, destructive, and uncaring. Is that how the relationship would go between the two races? Well, perhaps, but it depends highly on the culture and location of the species. Let's discuss where centaurs would live and why. Centaur life and culture is a fascinating concept to consider. How different would it be for them? Well, mostly they would be restricted in terms of living spaces. They won't do well in confined areas and places. Cities and towns and marketplaces will be confining for them, and seeing as they are more than likely a social race, they won't want to make their lives there. They'll want to remain in the wide open plains and fields where they would be able to hunt, thrive, and play. The anime monster Musume makes the claim that centaurs only eat vegetables like a normal horse.
It's okay, everybody! They eat fish and poultry all the time! Don't worry! It's fine! Well, I had no idea.
Well, I only eat vegetables.
But I'd like to assume that they are omnivores like humans, able to eat meat as well as vegetables. Considering the raw size of a horse and the complexity of the human mind that a centaur possesses, they'll need plenty of calories to keep them high functioning. They would need to consume a large amount of food and calories a day just to act at full capacity. This means they'd be adept hunters, likely mastering archery, spear tactics, and herding, and they will also likely domesticate animals like sheep, cows, and other animals for raising, food, and trade. But that will imply that they will need others with whom they trade, hence the relationship with humans. Centaur society seems very much a society of martial discipline. Every centaur example I've seen in fiction, with the one exception of Harry Potter, seem to exemplify a military or martial warrior style of living. Even the famous Greek centaur Chiron was the trainer of Hercules. This means that centaurs would be trained from childhood to be warriors. Like Spartans, centaurs would likely have an early introduction to fast travel, the use of spear and bow, and much of their play would involve learning to use tools of war. Male centaurs especially would be required to rise up and become strong warriors and leaders. In fact, in Narnia, the second in command of the Narnia warriors was a centaur, and he chose to turn and engage the White Witch himself to buy King Peter time to fall back, knowing he would likely die in the process. Females would have similar expectations, but would also be more protected for the purposes of breeding. Since their reproductive organs are likely similar to a horse, they would only be able to give birth to one child at a time, and reproduction would be crucial to the survivability of a warrior people. The Centaurs' ability to fight, hunt, thrive, and reproduce are what matter most to their people, and sometimes that can produce a more animalistic and rigid society. This means that affection and small acts of kindness and devotion are highly valued and rare in Centaur society. Strength is essential, and honor and pride come before all else. This can be shown in Monster Musume when Centaurea asks to hold Darling's hand, since it's a simple gesture she's not used to and she greatly enjoys it.
You can tell me.
Your hand.
Huh?
I think I'd like to hold your hand. Well, I've only ever held swords and bows. I thought maybe it might be kind of nice, because that's what human girls do. It wouldn't mean anything, unless you wanted it to.
So how would they do in human society? In medieval Europe, in a land where castles, fortifications, and cities are being established, there will be a distinct otherness towards centaurs that humans will likely feel. They are an outside race, and while perhaps not dangerous by nature, they are different, and difference at this point in time is often construed as bad. They aren't unholy though, and if they could potentially be traders with humans, they would still have a purpose. It would be a culture that makes their homes in the wide open plains, like the Comanche and Apache Indians, or the Mongolians of the steppe, who find great value in the centaurs. For these cultures like the Mongolians, for whom mounted warfare and lifestyle is essential, the centaur is the perfect creature, created by nature to do specifically what they try to emulate. While not worshipped, they would be idolized and respected highly, meaning that centaurs would always be welcome among their kind, creating a strong and impactful relationship. So how would centaurs be used in battle? For the medieval world, centaurs are natural cavalry. Arming them with a lance and shield to charge into enemy lines would be an excellent use of their abilities, and if they would allow it, giving them a human to ride on their backs while using a bow and arrow would allow for an archer to pick off distant enemies before the centaur even reaches them. Of course, this assumes the centaurs would let them. There is still some debate on if a centaur would consent to such a thing. In Monster Musume, it was seen as a violation for a human to ride a centaur as a common horse, and it was to only be done between a centaur and their master. However, in Narnia, it doesn't seem to be an issue, though the humans in that circumstance were considered royalty, so maybe the rules are different in that case. And also in Harry Potter, Friends, who was one of the centaurs, allowed Harry to ride his back, and the other centaurs chastised him for it, so maybe there is an honor code there. If the relationship with humans is strong, though, then perhaps a centaur would consent to a human on their back. If not, then at most they would consent to pulling a chariot or cart. But even in this, that would be an excellent advantage. A centaur is a tactical thinker and would be able to analyze and read a battlefield easier than a horse, so having an intelligent and aware horse pulling your chariot through the fight would be an excellent advantage. One of the most difficult things about chariots is the idea that if the horse pulling the chariot dies, then it's a really big problem. But if the horse can defend itself and care about not getting hit, then that's actually a very nice advantage. But another large question that needs to be asked is, as time marches on, would centaurs be able to live independently of humans? And the answer is no. The march of time would prove very costly for centaurs. While they could cultivate farmlands and ranches and crops, textiles and metallurgy would be near impossible for them. Unable to do much mining due to their stature, centaurs would soon fall behind humans who could do it far more effectively. Trade with humans would not only be necessary, but essential for their survival. As armor and weaponry grows and evolves, the raw size and make of them would make them easy to defeat using firearms and other weaponry of high caliber. Armor would be necessary, and making armor of metal strong enough to be effective would be difficult, if not impossible, for centaurs, meaning a partnership must be formed at some point for centaurs to not fall by the wayside. As time marched on and technology grew beyond cavalry into the era of World War I, for example, centaurs as warriors on the battlefield would become almost non-existent. They would be little more than giant targets to be taken down. They could still have some use. Carrying heavy tools, acting as medical transport, or working as messengers would work well, conserving on gas requirements for cars and trucks. And if they allowed soldiers to ride on them, they could transport important individuals around the battlefield quickly. The western front of the war would have too much muddy terrain where the centaurs would be slowed down tremendously, but on the eastern front, where there were more open areas to move around, the centaurs would make excellent couriers and ammo resources. With more advanced weaponry moving forward into the military age, centaurs might well be equipped to carry RPGs, LMGs, and heavy ordnance on their backs. However, they would likely never go to the front lines, as they could easily be picked off unless very well armored. Unfortunately, the days of Centaurs as frontline cavalry warriors would quickly come to an end as we approach the modern era. In the modern world, Centaurs would be a rarity. Few would live in high-populated cities as they would feel rather cramped and might struggle to adapt to the new lifestyle of busy and tight schedules. Rather, they'd likely live in open or urban areas. In fact, it stands to reason there might even be Centaur reservations, not unlike Indian reservations in America. Areas set aside specifically for Centaur society to live and thrive in with their own codes of conduct, laws, and practices. I'm afraid that the rift between Centaur and man may never truly vanish. The pride of the Centaurs and the inability to accept the unusual from humanity would always provide something of a barrier between them. It's not to say they couldn't coexist. It's certainly more than possible, and as in all things, no rule is without its exceptions. The Centaurs, like the horses for which they are often compared, are a free and proud spirit of martial zeal and liberty, things that humanity has always held in high esteem for themselves as well. There is more in common with the Centaur culture than maybe even humans realized. For that reason, I see Centaurs riding into the modern age, still impacting the eye and imagination of man as they do even in the real world. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.